Can people
Thank you so much for coming. Okay, I wanted to start on a celebratory note. I love both of these books so much. I'm such a huge super fan, so I'm going to fangirl a little bit first. And these books have haunted me since I've read them. And I'm so excited to be talking to you both about this. There have been so many rapturous starred reviews and all of that, but I just wanted to start by celebrating the fact that they're both longlisted for the Booker Prize. Woohoo! I screamed when I saw the list, and I was like, wait, I'm going to be talking to them both in like a month. I was so excited. Okay, so I wanted to start by asking you both to describe, for anybody in the audience who might not know what your books are about, just give a quick description and also tell us the origin story, because I know the origin stories I've heard, and they're so fascinating. So Susan, do you want to start maybe?
Sure.
Okay.
Can people hear me okay? We self-clipped our mics, so that's an extra skill we learned today. Flashlight is the story of a small family, a mother, a father, and a daughter, who go on a family trip to Japan in the late 1970s, where a catastrophe befalls them that changes their lives forever. And only 2 of the 3 members of that family return to the United States, where they had started. And the origins of this book are various, but the truest origin story is also going to give the biggest misimpression, which is that I traveled to Japan with my own family when I was a young girl in the late 1970s. This catastrophe did not befall us. And so in that sense, the book is not remotely autobiographical, but Japan made a big impression on me at that age, and I always wanted to write about it.
Okay, very cool. Katie?
Audition opens with a woman who's very much in the middle of her life. She's happily married, she's a successful actor, and a young man, a stranger, comes to her and says, "I think I'm your son." And from there, kind of 2 narratives unspool. And the origins of the story, I know them quite precisely. I saw a headline in the New York Times that read, "A stranger told me he was my son." And I didn't click on the article because I already knew just from reading the headline that I wanted to write a novel from that premise. But for a long time, I couldn't quite figure out my way into it. I was thinking of a lot of kind of plot-oriented explanations for that sentence. And then I was talking to a friend of mine, a wonderful poet, and I said, this sentence is so fascinating to me. And she said, that's just a description of parenthood. Every time my college-age son comes home, it's like a stranger has walked in. And that was when I thought, I want to write a novel that is about certain very universal experiences of parenthood, of making art, of being in a marriage, that nonetheless have something inside of them that feel kind of mutually exclusive or contradictory.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you both started with the families, because one of the things that struck me the most in reading both of your novels is just the relationships between the father and the daughter, and also sort of the relationships between father and daughter versus mother and daughter. And then in Audition, sort of, the relationship between mother and son, and father versus father and son. So, different genders, but that gender dynamic, especially in a mixed race family and marriage, I thought was so fascinating. Is that something that you set out to do? And this is a question that really applies to both of you.
And to you.
Yeah. No, maybe that's why I was so fascinated with it. Yeah, I myself am obsessed with it. Yeah. So, either of you want to take that?
I mean, I can start. Yes, I think that one of the things that interested me about writing about this family that, again, like I'm at pains to say, this is not my family, but at the same time, I think there's always something of myself in everything that I write, and always something of my most important relationships in everything that I write. And, I've been thinking about my relationships with both my parents my whole life. And in the novel, the daughter has a very different relationship with her father than she has with her mother. Her father is a very secretive person, and so he hasn't really given a lot of himself to either woman, to his wife or to his daughter. But the daughter, the two women react quite differently.
Yeah.
And the daughter is very loyal to her father. And, you know, I'll go ahead and reveal this since it's in the first pages of the book. It's the father who does not return home. And the relationship between daughter and mother is just sort of blown up as if a bomb landed on them, and they can never really connect with each other successfully after that. They are not brought closer together by this situation.
Well, I think there's blame there too, you know, especially when you're a child. Your parents are supposed to take care of you, so when a tragedy befalls, you really, and then there's only one parent left.
Yeah, there's only one person to blame.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
So there's that. And then in your case, it's the son, well, the son figure.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in all of my books, I've been very interested in these moments of uncanniness when somebody you think you know very well suddenly converts into a stranger. They suddenly appears to you as a stranger. And I've primarily written about that, I think, in the context of marriages, where you kind of look at your spouse and they suddenly seem unfamiliar to you. And I think one thing about having children is that I realize that the relationship in which those changes happen most rapidly and most frequently are actually between parent and child. Yeah. And I think, you know, when I think of the number of people my children have been between birth and even the age of 10 or 12, it's multiple. And both of you write about this so brilliantly, just that sense of somebody within family suddenly seeming, like feeling like you've had the wrong narrative about them the entire time. Yeah. And so that was something that I wanted to write about in this book, but I think rather than writing about it, I tried to write it directly into the structure of the book in some way.
Well, so let's go to the structure. So I'm a structure nerd. I love structure stuff. I love talking about structure. I love form. And I think, to me, if somebody's doing something experimental just to do it, it doesn't interest me as much as if you're doing it in service of the meaning of the story to further it. And I think both of you guys do that so well here. And, you know, as I was reading what this panel was supposed to be, you know, the relative strangers thing, and the unknowability of the people that we are supposed to love the most and know, you know, most intimately. And I think both of you guys take the structure, and I'm struggling a little bit not to spoil anything, but there is a breaking point in both of your books, and at which point we kind of get to one of the core mysteries of this question that you're both, I think, trying to explore, which is, you know, what happens when we can't know somebody that we really want to because of circumstance or because of, you know, our own minds or the stories that we tell ourselves, all of those things. And so I wanted to ask, is structure, the I think very innovative structure that both of your books have, is that something that you had in mind going in? How did you discover that? How did you decide to sort of arrive at that point?
Oh, I want to hear Katie's answer.
Yeah, I want to hear Katie's answer too. Well, I want to hear both of your answers.
I mean, Susan is the master of this.
I think
really,
yeah.
She really is.
Yeah.
And it, in particular, was something that I really wanted to try to do with Audition, which was to use structure to create the tension and momentum that we conventionally associate with plot, which is something that is Trust Exercise does so astonishingly and so brilliantly. But this idea that by placing two things side by side and the way those two things can generate meaning might provide the kind of momentum that will keep a reader turning the pages in a way. Like, can you use structure to create what feels to the reader like a plot twist? Can you create structure to create to reveal meaning, to change a reader's understanding of the relationships between people? So structure was very much something that I wanted to use in this book. I actually love plot very, very much. I'm not one of these people who who kind of disdains plot. I think
Yeah.
plot is extraordinary. I think it's exceptionally hard to do. But here, in this case, I wanted to think, can structure take some of the work that we conventionally associate?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think we were talking about this before, sometimes when you have that kind of a structure that leaves some ambiguity and more of a role, more of an active role for the reader in deciding what's actually happening and to kind of provide that plot, if you will. Which I think you do, Susan. I mean, you've done brilliantly in all of your previous books. And in this book, I remember thinking, as I was reading the first, half, 2/3 of it, like, oh, this is, chronologically told story. And then you did something kind of halfway through that kind of blew my mind. And I thought, okay, here she goes again. I don't know why I thought that I wasn't going to see that here.
It's what you just said about the reader's role is really interesting to me because I really, in this book and in my previous book, the structure of which has been remarked upon a lot, the process of composing that book is the complete rehearsal for the reader's experience, because I did not go into either project having any kind of a premeditated understanding of how the structure would work. And I agree with you. First of all, plot is, I'm always confused by people who disdain plot because it seems so fundamental to me. That's the story. That's kind of why we're here, right? We like that.
Yeah.
I like it. And it is the hardest thing. It's the most difficult thing to achieve. And when you do a really good job, when writers actually do a really good job of crafting plot, it seems so organic and it seems so inevitable that I think that can lead us as readers to sort of disdain it because we can't imagine the story going any other way, right? So you're like, well, of course it's like that. How hard was that to figure out? But it's the hardest thing to figure out. So with this book especially, I think that with both plot and structure, I really didn't know, and so much of the process of figuring it out was in the process. I had to write so much of the material and then just kind of be struggling inside of it, like a prisoner of all this stuff, thinking what is this? How does it work? What is it meant to tell the reader? I think that I figure it all out as I go.
Which is so inspiring, because I remember a few years ago when I was talking to you about Flashlight, and you were describing this process of I don't know, I have all these pages and I don't know what's happening, and I was like, oh my God, that feels so, I loved hearing that, because I was like, well, that means that there's hope for the rest of us, if you don't know what you're doing, and
I love it. It
you're
feels
kind
great
of
for
figuring
other
it
people
out,
to hear about it.
Yes. And I think it was also because my book had been done, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to think about anything new for another year, So I was like, but what I love about that, what you're saying, is that you did have the very beginning of this book, which was a short story, Flashlight, in the New Yorker, that I loved and that won the Sunday Times Prize. And was that sort of the first thing that you started with respect to this book?
Not really. First of all, the anecdote that you just told, I really love that, because I think that's kind of where most of my books come from, is a situation, a very sort of concisely understood situation that just grabs me. And that, even you just had it as a sentence, a stranger told me
yeah.
He was my son. And with Flashlight, I also had a situation.
Yeah.
There was a situation that I had really been bitten by, where I was like, I really want this to happen, but I could not figure out how to do it in fiction. And so that story was the first of many efforts I made. And the thing about this story is that because I was so much I keep using the word prisoner in this, that's strange. Are there psychoanalysts in the audience? Because I was such a prisoner of this situation that I wanted to use fictionally but could not make work, with that story, I was like, I'm just going to skip to the time in the characters' lives after it happened. I was like, I'll just jump ahead and write their lives after it happens, and then I'll worry about how to deal with it
Yeah.
later. So when I wrote that story, I already had it, but I could not put it on the page.
Yeah. And I think that it's the first story, and so I think we can say, like, it's a story. Do you want to say what the story is, what the it was? The very beginning
I don't know if we can say
impetus?
what it is.
People are shaking their heads.
Okay.
People are like, no.
Yeah, people don't know. Okay. All right.
We don't want to be
And then
coy,
Katie,
though.
similarly, like in the same way, when I was thinking about both of your novels, in the same way that you had sort of the core that was already out in the world, you know, with respect to the short story that happens in Japan, with Katie, for you, you had two novels that were very much celebrated that were sort of along the same vein as this novel, not the same narrator, but an unnamed woman. And you have talked about this possibly being like a trilogy, and this being the third of a trilogy. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that affected your writing process and how that led to this novel?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is the third of three books that all have unnamed female narrators. They're all very interested in questions of interpretation.
Yeah.
In particular, the first one has a translator, the second one has a simultaneous interpreter working at a war crimes tribunal, and this one has an actor. So they're all female characters who are speaking the words of other people. I realized when I finished this book that they're all female characters who are surrounded by male writers, as it turns out.
Yeah.
And so I think there was obviously something about that set of concerns, that idea of characters who are channels for the language of other people, characters who are transformed by language passing through their body, but who also change the meaning of language as they speak it. That I wanted to keep thinking about. I would say that with this book, it was interesting. I started it out with a much more, I guess I would say, realist or straightforward construction, where I thought I would start with this premise, which I outlined, and then it would progress in a fairly realistic way through to the end. And I just had the sense when I got about 30 pages in that I knew how to do that, in part because I'd written two books that had a kind of similar voice, and that was when I thought actually I wanted to try to kind of take a risk and take a jump and do something that where failure felt very close. Like I feel like when a book is working, it's kind of like, you know, here's you doing your thing, and then there's like this failure black hole.
Yeah.
And that's kind of energizing in a way, and that's propulsive in the writing process. And so that is really on an emotional level where the structure of the book came from.
Yeah. And I think that with respect to this question of, you know, there being a stranger in the family, or you know, these relationships that are unknowable in many ways, I also think that your titles really do a great job of advancing that. I mean, like for Flashlight, you know, for me, Flashlight is like, you know, connotes safety. You're trying to see into something that is kind of inherently a little mysterious, and we have a couple of people who are dealing with darkness and family secrets and trying to know somebody. And I love that the flashlight kind of motif like carries throughout. Was that something that you intentionally carried also, and was Flashlight always your title?
I'm going to answer both of your questions, but I just have to say, because as you were talking, I couldn't help thinking about your title, and I'm very obsessed by the title Audition, and actually the word audition is a word that in my previous book, one of my characters is obsessed by, and the idea that the audition, which we think of as, you know, when an actor goes up for a role and like sort of does their monologue, but it of course comes from the same root as the words for hearing, and it's a listening, and the way in which listening is so important to your book and the way in which things are heard very differently was one of the things I really loved about the way the book is playing with language itself. Okay, the flashlight. to get back to Angie's
No,
excellent
I mean,
question.
I wanted to ask about both titles, so yeah, and we'll do yours too, but
Well, I mean,
yeah.
the first thing I thought of is, no, I didn't actually think about the flashlight's symbolic significance, and I didn't really think of it as a title. It's very pragmatic. I'd been floundering around in this material, and I managed to sort of craft it into something that seemed coherent to people, so we submitted. And when you do that, you're like, hey, New Yorker, will you please? It's sort of coherent. And they did publish it, and I just called it Flashlight sort of just off the top of my head because there's a flashlight in the story. It was really not a very thoughtful act of naming at all. And then it usually takes someone else making an observation about my work for me to see it a little more intelligently. And my agent said, oh, I love the flashlight motif, because this is so much about how people see and don't see. And I was like, oh, you're right.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that. But again, bringing it back to this idea of audition and the way in which the uncertainty that you develop throughout the course of the story, which becomes so riveting and actually it's almost an unbearable tension of what, how much uncertainty are we dealing with here? And it has to do often with how characters are hearing each other speak and how they're speaking words that have been given to them, and the way in which the language itself creates the uncertainty. It doesn't really dispel it. And the flashlight effect, as I'm sure a lot of people know, is this sort of unexpected effect where when you shine a bright light, it actually impairs your vision. Right? Because you can see one thing really clearly, but you can't, suddenly your ability to see all the other stuff is vastly diminished. Everybody knows this from camping, right? If you sit around the campfire and then you get up and try to walk to go use the bathroom or something, you're blind. And so I like those kind of contradictory factors in the seeing and the hearing.
Yeah, no, I love that too, and I hadn't thought about that meaning of audition. I think maybe because my background is theater, I so focused on the performance aspects and the rehearsal aspects of this, and I sort of thought of audition as, people trying on different roles in other people's lives and sort of discarding them or picking and choosing between the different moments. And so that's kind of, because there is an actor, and so much of the book is about acting. That's, I think, what I gravitated toward, and this is just blowing my mind right now. And did you always call it Audition? Same question for Susan?
No, my titles always change, usually between copy edits and first pass pages. I mean, they always change. And for a long time, the title for this book was Performance.
Oh yeah.
And then it changed, and Audition. It was because of the hearing that was. It was. I love this. It was the kind of trying out parts, of course. But it was also particularly in the second half of the book, the characters hearing things a lot, and the way she hears things changes a lot, and the kind of internal space of how you hear what is around you, the kind of space inside her head became increasingly important. So that was where the title came. But it's always a very panicked moment in the publication of a book where suddenly everybody says your title doesn't work.
Exactly.
And then I have an envelope, and I'm just writing words.
Yes. On
the envelope, and then that happened with Intimacies as well. The title changed quite at the last minute.
It was Audition your.
It was my title. It was my title, and I found it kind of in part from reading and understanding how much hearing and spatial awareness is important to the book, because it is in no way a pandemic novel, but it is a novel that takes place in a small New York apartment with family members driving each other up the wall. Yeah. And so this kind of contained space in the sense of being able to hear other people.
Yeah, I love that. Right. And one of the things that I thought was also really fun in I was thinking about your two books as being in conversation with each other. And in many ways, Audition, I sort of thought has many more sort of overt ways of reflections or whatever you want to call it, conversations with trust exercise, just because of the acting, things. But one thing that I thought was so interesting about these two books were just the sense of kind of mystery and dread and this atmosphere that you both build. And I think a lot of that comes from sort of the initial mystery of what did happen to, Louise's father, to this, father who, did not come back from Japan back to the US. And then in your book, this question of who is this man who is meeting with, our protagonist or our narrator in the very beginning. And that just drove me, and I think I did this thing with both of your books where I just could not put it down, because when I had the books and I was reading them, I felt this sense of like, okay, I'm gonna find out, I'm gonna find out, I'm gonna find out. And then I wasn't able to find out for a long, long time, and so it kind of kept me going. And and what I wanted to ask, and this is writing process kind of, question is, did you have a sense of what the answers to some of these questions that you are reading for the characters and for the readers? Did you have a sense of what the answers were, or were you writing in order to figure out and talk a little bit about your writing process with respect to that?
Should I take?
Yeah, sure.
I definitely had some of the answers. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's because the premise that I've referred to that kind of gripped me was, it was the answer to one of these big, big questions that emerges very early in the book. So I had that, and I always knew that that was what I wanted to reveal. But I love what you said a minute ago about failure and how energizing the prospect of failure is, because it's really, you put it so well. And it's very counterintuitive, but I was so committed to this idea for this book, and at the same time, I felt like it was absolutely the worst idea I'd ever had, and there was no way that I could get away with it in fiction. So I kept grappling with this idea where I was like, this is what happens, and then I'd be like, no, you can't get away with doing that in fiction. It's just not going to work. And I think there was something about the energy of that internal conflict where I was so wedded to an idea that to me seemed like, in my mind had labeled it ludicrous, where my mind was like, no, Susan, that is ludicrous. and so the internal argument was, I think, what propelled the work in a lot of ways, because it always felt like right past the edge of whatever scene I was working on was the total failure of the story, where every reader who ever picked it up would go, nope, ludicrous, you really failed this time. And so yeah, in that sense I did have that thing, but I didn't know if I could get away with it. That was the uncertainty.
But do you feel like, given that this is your sixth novel, that even though that prospect of failure is there, that you really did have this kernel of confidence that this is how, in the process, right? Of this is how I always feel, because I feel like that. I feel like that with every story that I write. I feel like while I'm writing it, this is gonna so fail, but I guess that's just part of the process of writing. Does it get easier? I guess is what I'm trying to ask you for myself, because I'm going through that right now.
And I want your answer to this question.
Yes, absolutely.
No, actually,
No, Susan.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe this is encouraging, and maybe it's discouraging. I think it depends on your personality type. But
yeah.
no, I have books that have never made it out of the box that they're living in right now, because they never worked.
Okay.
And so that's always a possibility, is it'll never work. And this book was definitely a major candidate for it will never work.
Oh, wow.
And until pretty late in the game, I was like, it's never gonna work. Do you write against this feeling that it might just not work at all?
Yeah. I assume it won't work. That's
you assume. Yeah, maybe
that's the default position.
That's the thing. Set the low expectations.
I assume it won't work. And with this book in particular, I kept saying, my husband's also a novelist. In fact, I did an event with him here, maybe in this room. 8 years ago. But I kept going downstairs and saying, I think this won't work. And he was like, well, you know, try.
You might be right.
But it was, I don't know, I think, I feel like I can smell when a writer knows they know how to do everything in a book. And it makes for a less exciting book for me to read. Like when you feel like the writer is, it's not a question of being in control of the writing, because I mean, in fact, the word I kept thinking of when I was reading Flashlight was, it is absolutely magisterial. I mean, what you do is extraordinary, and it is, I mean, it is remarkably controlled, and it seems impossible to believe that you would ever have thought it couldn't work. But I think that vibration of a writer who has tremendous control over the text, but is still able to let doubt and uncertainty creep into the process, is what makes books really exciting for me as a reader to read. So I've come to feel at peace with it. I think actually when it feels like it's too smooth, that's actually a bit of a warning sign to me that something's not, like if you know all the answers when you start writing, there's no process of discovery in the writing, and I do think the reader can sense that in some way.
Oh, I totally believe so. I mean, I do think that I'm a proponent of this whole like method acting thing where like it doesn't matter if you're saying it exactly in the same way, with the same tone, with the same facial expressions. If you're not actually feeling it inside, the audience can tell. And I feel the same way with respect to the words. Like maybe even the words might even be the same, but somehow like there's a way that, you know, it feels surprising. And I think maybe that comes from the writer being surprised as they're discovering the story, as they're writing it too.
Yeah.
But I do think that the one thing I'm guessing is that, you know, with this being your 5th book and your 6th book, that at the sentence level, I feel like these books, I was just, you know, underlining everything and just the beauty of the prose and the rhythm, and it just, you guys are like at the top of your game right now. And I wanted to ask you, again, like another writing craft kind of question, which is, does the beauty of the prose and the sort of that completeness, does that come from the editing process, or are you kind of like creating those sentences as you go, as you're discovering the story? So are you like doing both? Are you discovering the sentences and the story, or are you kind of like writing rough to just discover the story and the direction of the book, and then coming back to sort of craft those beautiful sentences? You want to take that one, Katie?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm actually so nervous of style in general, I think, and I'm nervous of beautiful language, I think, in my
Of what?
I'm nervous of kind of falling into the trap of kind of being overly preoccupied with style. And I think at an earlier point in my career, I was writing and I was really honing every sentence and paring everything back, and it was being very, very reduced, and I actually felt like I was using that to not actually think about the thing itself. I was relying on, obsessed with style, but not actually thinking about what I was using that style for. And so I think what I've been trying to do in the last few books is actually develop a looser writing style. I mean, there are many bad sentences in this book. There are many infelicities.
I really would. I don't agree with that at all. That is actually unfactual.
There are no bad sentences in the book.
But I mean, I kind of, I wanted to write in a way where I would be more open to infelicities of language, because I think that's actually how people think and how people speak. Very few of us, especially because I'm writing in first person, speak in perfect metaphors. And so the voices, the narrators are often, you know, to find the perfect way of expressing something, it takes them 1, 2, 3, 4 tries, and I keep all 4 tries in the sentence rather than just immediately jumping to the 4th try. So that actually makes editing on the sentence level a bit easier because I kind of try not to over edit it.
Yeah.
So I think it's the sentences are not too far from what they look like when they first come out. But I think my question really that is increasingly preoccupying me is like, if you have a particular style you write in, then what do you do with that style, and what is that style useful for? And I think in my case, I have a relatively pared back style without that many details, and that meant that potentially, because in this book often a sentence will have to scan 2 different ways, particularly in the second half of the book, it seemed to me that that was a way of maximizing the possibilities of that style, of that lack of detail.
Yeah, I love that, especially because you're talking again about, not like, I love what you say about the style, not just for style's sake, but it really advancing, what that character is thinking. And I do think that because your character here is very controlled and very much aware of the words that she's speaking, because she is this actor and she thinks so much about that, I do think that that kind of advances our understanding of this character who is otherwise, kind of distant from us, especially in the beginning, Susan, how about you? Do you edit as you're going along, or are you trying to perfect at the sentence level as you're writing?
I mean, well, yes and yes and no, but I think first, I really want to point out something I think is so important about what Katie said that's so interesting, which is that the question of style, I think, does become a really urgent one when you're writing in the first person. And so when you're trying to offer a voice to the reader, and you as the author are imposing a style on that voice, I think it can become a real problem. And it's definitely a big difference between writing in the first person, where you're essentially creating a monologue in a way, and writing in some other perspective, where maybe you're creating a monologue that belongs to some power that hovers over all the characters. But there are really different choices to be made, and I think I'm really fascinated by what you said about kind of trying to pare back the style, and also about preoccupation. I think when I was a younger writer earlier in my efforts to write, before I'd even published my first book, I was so besotted with certain very flamboyant styles. I loved Nabokov, I loved Woolf. And if you fall in love with those writers, it's very dangerous, because you start really spending a lot of energy creating these intricate sentences that have these spectacular metaphors in them. And then at some point you're like, what is this for, though? What's apart from showing off, or just kind of feeling pleased with your own cleverness, what role is it serving? And so I think I do struggle with this question of pretty writing, and being very preoccupied with making pretty writing, and I'm trying to be less that person, and even pushing back against my own, in my heart, I'm always wanting to make pretty writing. In the same way that I want the living room to look nice. I'm always I'm always should I buy these throw cushions? Is this a nice metaphor? Can I make everything pretty? But that's not often what the story needs.
Right, but I do think that as somebody who's newer to writing, and as with I'm working on my 3rd novel and feeling very lost. I do think that there is a sense to which when I get up from my writing floor, because I write in the closet, but whatever. But when I do that at the end of the day, when I think it gives me a little rush of pleasure that I think I need for my confidence, and to sort of tamp down my insecurities, to sort of say, okay, I have no idea what's happening with the story, but at least I have this one sentence that I like, that I wrote today, or that I wrote this week, or whatever. So I do think that serves that purpose for me. But I don't know that you need that, when you're, when you have all these books that are just beautiful and already out there, and you don't have to.
No, I mean, I think that I'm always a reader as I'm writing, and if I'm not happy reading what I made that day at all, that's a bad day.
Right? It's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, and it happens a lot.
Yeah.
But, it's because you're always, I think you're all by yourself while you're writing, trying to figure out is this good? Does it work? And so you're always a reader at the same time.
Yeah.
You want something good to read.
Yeah. I did want to let everybody know that in about 5 minutes or so, I'm going to ask people to come, in 3 minutes, sorry. I'm going to ask people that they can start lining up at the microphones for questions, so start thinking of them now. I did want to also ask about the length of the novel, because Susan, I've heard you say that you set out to write, like you wanted to write like your shortest book or whatever. Audition is, I believe, your shortest novel.
No way.
So yeah, so talk a little bit about that and how the length of the stories came to be what they are. Because I just think that that's so interesting also.
Yes,
Yeah.
who wouldn't? Yes.
Me.
Right. So how did it come to be? Because I did hear you say, right? Like that you wanted to have it be like very short. And
I have a fascination with the novella or the novella length novel, the short novel. It's actually like possibly my favorite genre. And I know everyone's like, well, what is it? That's my question that I love to ask people. But for me, it's usually like a novel that's, you know, less than 200 pages, sometimes less than 150 pages. I even have like kind of an ideal word count for it. And I teach a class on the novella, and I kind of collect favorite novellas because I think it's one of the most perfect forms. I think it's so rigorous, it's very difficult to create beauty and meaning in a small space, which is what Katie has done.
Absolutely.
So when I set out to write this book and I had my idea of what I wanted it to be about, I also had a sort of a exemplary text that I wanted to emulate, and it was Visitation by the East German writer Jenny Erpenbeck. And this is a very slender, just miraculous novel. And so my folly was, I was like, I'm going to take this idea and write a Visitation version of it. And I published the longest book I have ever published in my career. And this was after an agonizing cutting of 35,000 words from it, I think, because it was even more longer. I was going to use an uncomplimentary adjective, but it was even longer than this. So that is my failure. You succeeded.
I wanted to write something longer, and I really did, and I didn't. I don't know. I'm hoping the next one is longer.
I'm hoping the next one is shorter. So
maybe we can
swap.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the scope of Flashlight is it's not just impressive; it's very moving, and there are certain things that the book does that would not be possible without that length. To me, as a reader, they would not be. There's a moment which I won't. If I spoil, just cover my mouth. I won't. There's an event in the opening of the book which you mentioned, and then quite a ways later, we circle back to that event from another person's point of view.
Yeah.
Floods of tears. I feel very emotional right now, even talking about it. I don't think that would work if you'd read it 40 pages later. I think you needed the life that came in. I'm not spoiling anything. Am I?
No.
There's something about that.
About
there's something about that pacing. That's another book that does that beautifully is The Savage Detectives by Roberto Bolaño. It has an opening. There's a very, very long middle section, and then it circles back at the end. The emotional weight of that ending would not be possible without the scope of the book. And so there is so much about scope. It's not about simply about having more event or talking about more things or more characters. It's something about the architecture of the book and the emotional experience of the reader that can't always be done.
And the emotional experience for the reader that sort of echoes and allows us to experience what the characters are experiencing, because part of that emotional sort of agony that a lot of the characters in the book are going through is about time. It's about all this time. And that's what I mean by, I love how the structure furthers the story and the experience that we are able to see from the perspective of the characters. So you're allowing us, you know, in this compressed version of the novel, obviously not years and years, but you're allowing us to experience what the characters are going through vis-a-vis this, the structure of the novel.
As you said, time, because I was thinking, as you were speaking, Katie, like, although the books seem like opposites in terms of their length, like, I think we're both really interested in time. And I'm very interested in time and the way the novel works with time. And I think this is why I idealize the shorter novel. But it's true, both novels work with time in very different ways. And one of the reasons I love the short novel is because I actually really like reading a book in a single sitting. It's my sort of ideal thing to do. And I had actually blocked a chunk of time to read Audition, and then I kept rereading sections of it. Yeah. And because I'm pretty good at knowing how long it's going to take me to read something, but if I keep rereading sections because I admire them so much, I fell short by 12 pages. My window ended, and I was like, no. And so I had to actually read it in one sitting and a second micro sitting. But time is really important to the way books work, whether they're short or long.
Yeah. So I think we're ready for questions if people want to line up and ask any questions. But I have plenty of my own if nobody else wants. Oh, okay. Yes. Great. Yes.
Hi, thank you. I just want to say it was so interesting to me that you three actually were paired together for a discussion, and I didn't really parse that other than, wow, I like all of these three authors, how wonderful, like three incredibly talented women in particular. But as you were talking, I was really struck by, I love both of your works, but I have been always frustrated as a reader in like a way that I had to sort of examine, is this my favorite book, or did I like hate this book? Because I was so challenged
I love that.
by what you were forcing me as a reader to do a little bit of work on my own to really try to come to whatever I interpret your words to be. And I was wondering, and hearing you two talk today clearly with a lot of admiration for each other and your approaches to the work and the work that you've done, I see now that maybe there are through lines between your different writing styles, different writing lengths. And I wonder if that's something you see in each other as well, sort of these trends of wanting to, put aside that beautiful sentence sometimes, or, leave that interpretation and work to the reader. If you can also see that in each other and sort of the work that you're doing separately.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for the. No. I mean, thank you for persevering with the books, which is. I mean, I think. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but I think for me, I always think of myself as making the book with the reader, and I know that books are. When I read a book, 80% of that is coming from me, really, and 20% is from what the writer put on the page. And so it is really a collaboration, but that it does ask a lot of the reader, and it requires a lot of faith that there'll be readers like you who will be, even if they're frustrated or uncertain, will be willing to go on the. And I mean, I feel like your work. I feel like when I read Susan's work, I feel like she has the highest opinion of the reader. Of the absolute highest opinion of the reader. I feel that she believes in me and trusts me. And that is, for me, almost the foundation of really connecting with a book is the feeling that the writer trusts me with it.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello. This question is also for you, Katie. There's a section in the book where you sort of talk about the restrictions on language and emotions around pregnancy and child loss, and I sort of just wanted to talk about what inspired that inclusion in the book, and how you hoped it would.
I mean, I think I was. I think language is really important, and I think the way certain words do or do not circulate through culture and society is very, very important. And in the case of this book, the word was abortion, and it becomes actually a plot point, a biggish plot point in the book, and the way that a kind of euphemism, so to speak, is used instead of that. And I think that was just something I was thinking about a great deal because of the political context around me as I was writing the book. I think words matter tremendously. I think having the commitment to using the correct words is very, very important. So that was I did not I think I wrote it before Roe v. Wade was overturned. But I think we write from the context in which we're living, and so in that sense, it was not difficult to see where things were tending.
Yeah. Yes.
I read both your books in the context of the Booker long list, and I was wondering if you read the competitors on the long list, and how that feels to be in a competition when it's so personal what you do. I love both books.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take that. I mean, yes, like it would be my hope to read my way through that list, not necessarily because it's the Booker long list, but because all the books on it are so compelling, and I know which book on that list is up next for me. But I also, try not to be too awards driven in my reading, to be honest. And so I'm always sort of reading things for various reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, I was so honored to be on that list because I love the book. I love so many of the writers.
It's a
on that.
great list.
Yeah, it's great. It is.
Yeah,
It's a very exciting list to be on.
Very exciting. Yes.
So you've both talked about the uncertainty you feel when writing, and I'm curious what you know or what you feel when you've stuck the landing and you have something you feel good about, and when you're done touching it or editing it.
Oh, I love that.
We're both.
I mean,
never had that way.
yeah, it is a little bit. I mean, I don't know now if the book works really.
Yeah.
I don't think. I mean, it's taken away from you at a certain point.
Yeah. I could add to that. I think I remain very, very uncertain, and usually, if I'm lucky, it's usually my relationship with my editor that kind of brings to an end the creative process, partly because they tell you don't have any more time.
Yeah.
And partly because, if it's a really good editor, sometimes they've, in the space between the first full draft and the published book, they've asked some really, really important questions. And then in that kind of exchange where you're doing more writing, especially with this book, my editor did feel like, she was like, my questions are answered. And that, to me, knowing that she felt that way, gave me a sense of finality that I don't think I would have had otherwise, just on my own.
Actually, the best note I ever got from my editor is actually almost the opposite. She wrote to me and she said, "I know you think you're done, but you're not."
That also
Which
happens.
also happens.
Yes, quite a lot.
Which also happens. And sometimes the guidance is really about, and then another time she said, "It is time to stop now."
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, all three of you. I'm intrigued by this idea of how to overcome maybe the hang-up of the influence of Nabokov or Woolf, whoever's in our personal canon. Best note young Tony Bennett ever got was, you can't be Frank Sinatra, you gotta have your own voice, right? Anything either of you can tell us about finding your voice?
Wow, that's a really good question.
It's a really hard question.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to know how it happens.
Yeah.
And I think you do need to be enthralled. I mean, you have to love writers. You have to love other writers. You have to read widely.
I think that, I would say, for me, the visceral experience of realizing that I'm trying and failing to imitate an idolized writer is a good corrective. And I spent a lot of time in my early 20s trying to write like Virginia Woolf and really not succeeding. And I'm glad I failed, but also at some point it was just humiliating to keep doing those, embarrassing. So that was a curative too.
Yeah. And also, I imagine that it's also driven by the character, the unique characteristics of that particular character whose POV you're trying to inhabit, whose mind you're trying to inhabit. Because I remember for Trust Exercise, the different sections had very different voices. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Angie, I'm a big fan of both of your books as
thank
well.
you.
So thank you, all three of you.
you.
I'm just very fascinated by the idea of more experimental structure, especially less traditional structure in books. broadly. And you talked a little bit about how you came to different structures in your books, and especially Katie, you mentioned something about how you figured out how your personal style and the structure kind of come together, and I thought that was really interesting. So I just would love to hear any other thoughts or advice on how to think about structure in an intentional way and not just to do it.
Yeah. Katie,
Yeah,
do you
it's
want to?
such an. I mean, it is. I think the thing I dislike the most in writing, and I really try to avoid it, is anything that seems like flashiness for the sake of flashiness, whether it's on the level of the sentence and definitely when it's on the level of structure. And I think for me in this book, it was really this feeling of not wanting to write about something, but wanting to write it directly and use the structure of the book to manifest this kind of tension that I was talking about at the very beginning, of the sense that there are experiences that have incommensurate aspects to them. Yeah, I don't know.
You said using structure intentionally, I think, and I mean, my first thought, and this is not like an effort to be contradictory, but I actually think that what has worked best for me actually was having no intentions about structure at all, to have no preconceptions about structure, which include like the preconceptions of the realist genre itself. And one of the things I've just thought of to say to the very first questioner, because I love that question, is in my earlier work, I do feel that my books are less, I think, challenging in terms of like how to read them, because I was much more wedded to traditional realism without realizing it, because I just assumed that there was just one way to write, and that was the way. And when I became, more conscious of how many different ways we can write, things started changing. And so I think an openness and not sort of sitting down and going, I'm going to write a book that has 3 parts, and each part is going to totally upend the reader's expectations. Like that's never worked. And at least for me. And I think what has worked is just trying to get interested in certain questions and problems about the situation, about the characters, and just really making a mess. And then usually my structural decisions aren't made until there's a lot of material. And I start just playing around with it and sort of seeing like how I'm experiencing the material. That's where the structure starts to evolve, is after the fact.
Thank you.
I think we're gonna do one final question. I'm sorry, I'm getting the wrap it up, but you can feel free to come up afterwards and talk to these ladies. Yes. Final question.
Sure. I have another question about structure. So I haven't gotten the chance to read Flashlight yet, but I have read Audition and Trust Exercise, both of which have a pretty big like formal break in the middle. And when I was reading both of those books, I kind of felt like the earth was spinning me off, but I really wanted to hold on. But there have been other books that have a formal break in the middle where I'm like, like I don't want to deal with that. I don't like it. I don't care anymore. And I'm just wondering, like, what techniques do you use to keep that really important tension, to keep the reader interested in holding on for this kind of like journey?
Yeah. Difficult.
I'm relieved to hear. I'm relieved. I mean, I was thinking about what you were saying about having to be a reader of your own work, and I think it's really, really hard, especially with something that has a reveal or a structural break, to know how it strikes the reader, because you know what's coming in some way. But I think I don't know. I don't know. I teach on an MFA program, and the book that I love assigning is Ford Maddox Ford's The Good Soldier, which has a really extraordinary structure. But often when people read it, they think it has no structure at all. They think he's just kind of letting the story unfold in this very messy way. But in fact, he said explicitly, when I look back at that novel now, I have no idea how I structured it. And I don't think I would have the energy to structure something that meticulously. So I think ideally you hope you write something that that maybe has the artifice of a big structural break, but that feels like it couldn't be told in any other way, or there's something that feels inherent to the story itself. I don't think that's a very good answer. I apologize.
No, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, and this was awesome.